year is 1950, and a 15th class Garratt number 398 brings up the tail end of a batch of 15 new Garratts built for the Rhodesian Railways. This batch wouldn't be the last batch, as the Rhodesian Railways would order more between 1950 and 1952, and this by the end of production left the Rhodesian Railways with a whopping 74 units built. In service, the 15ths and 15As were mostly pretty reliable. Running costs wouldn't break the bank for the Rhodesian Railways, which was definitely ideal. This isn't to say they got off scot-free though, and most did have a few issues. One of the quite major ones they were plagued with in the 60s was cracking in the lower boiler frames. A reason for this has never truly been found, although it wasn't thought to be mileage related, as the older ones didn't seem to suffer from it. Thankfully though, by the end of the 60s, the problem was pretty much resolved. In 1955, the Rhodesian Railways had started to buy diesel locomotives in hopes of keeping with the times and phasing out steam locomotives over the course of the next 20 years. This in turn meant a few of the Class 15s, among other steam locomotives, were removed from service, and with oil prices being reasonably cheap, this encouraged their decision. But then, a glimmer of hope for steam and a somewhat sideline of diesel locomotives was a major oil crisis in the 1970s, which meant it was getting more and more expensive to not only run fuel-thirsty diesels, but buy new ones as well. And with coal still being reasonably easy to come by, a solution was clear. The dieselisation plan was abandoned, an overhead system put in place, and 87 Garratt locomotives put through an extensive overhaul program to try and keep them going until the 90s. Of the Class 15s that were rebuilt, all were given names, and this is where 398 gets hers from. Due to the overhaul, 398 kept on steaming right up until 1993. By now, the 1990s had rolled around. The locomotives once overhauled were now once again worn down and outdated. Due to steam locomotive production around the world mainly ceasing in the 50s and 60s, sourcing parts was quite a big issue, and with getting oil back into the country cheaply having been resolved, the dieselisation plan was put back into action. Although, there was once again another glimmer of hope. On the other side of the world in New Zealand, a small collection of volunteers in Paikokariki were building up interest to try and buy one of the Garratts. They call themselves the Flying 15th Group. Their aim? To fill a gap in New Zealand preservation after all our G-class Garratts were scrapped due to not really taking off over here. A representative of the group visited Bulawayo in Zimbabwe to look over a few candidates. 398 was in the end selected. An offer was made, deposit paid, and soon more representatives went over to watch the old workhorse haul a fully loaded freight train from Bulawayo to Cement to test her abilities. By this time, they knew they'd made the right choice. She was then towed to Kimberley in South Africa and waited there until 2011, when she was split into her three major components, put on three heavy haul road trailers, taken to Durban, put on a ship, and finally on the 18th of May 2011, 398 touched New Zealand rails for the first time, closing an old chapter and beginning a new one. So there you have it, the history of why she's here and her life before coming here. But what's she like in 2023? Let's go and have a look for ourselves.